most valuable and important in life is found outside in the stuff of the world. But that's wrong. It's not only wrong, it's a destructive notion, really. Everything of true value is found here, before it can be found outside of us. It's found here. This is the light that we need to use to see the world. This is the projector. If we don't turn it on, we see only darkness before us. The good news is that when we allow that light within us to project outward, everyone we encounter and everything that we see is touched by that light. It's impossible to live in darkness when we invite that light that is our true nature, our Christ nature, to illuminate the way. I want to start this talk by connecting it to a personal story. I guess it's a bit of an analogy for what we're going to be talking about this morning. So when I was a kid, I guess you might have described me as a mischievous kid. Well, maybe mischievous isn't entirely the right word. Adventurous, I think adventurous. I like to think of it as adventurous. Entangled maybe with some mischief. As a teen, I was enamored with the Lord of the Rings books, and other fantasy and science fiction books and stories. And I looked at everything in life through the lens of adventure. In fact, I used to tell friends, adventure is my middle name. Yeah, you laugh. That might be why some of them thought I was a bit odd. I mean, there were other reasons, but that was maybe one of them. Anyway, so when I was a teenager, we lived at the edge of a mountainside, at the end of a road that butted up against a mountainside, and I used to love to hike those trails. And sometimes I would make my way out in the middle of the night to venture up to the top of the mountain, to the summit. Up there was a group of radio masts that kind of signaled that I was at the summit. And I used to, don't tell my mom was probably watching. And I used to sneak out my bedroom window in the middle of the night sometimes with some snacks and a flashlight to make my way to the top of the mountain. And the interesting thing was, although I carried a flashlight, I used to challenge myself not to use it. Instead, I attempted to endure the unknown. Even when I became terrified, I just challenged myself not to turn that flashlight on. I was usually frightened by my own imagination. It was kind of thrilling and kind of scary, and wondering what might be lurking in the darkness around me, what might be the cause of the sounds that I heard, and what dangers might lay in wait. And then the next day, after one of these midnight hikes, when I went to school, I was in high school, like from the playground, I could see the radio mast and the summit of the mountain, and I used to look up there and have this kind of special secret. And I'd think to myself, I was up there last night, and nobody else knew that, and that special secret would carry me through the day. So as a midnight hike, it was incredibly fun and adventurous to hike without a flashlight. But as a way of life, I wouldn't recommend it. It's much better to have a light. Now I never leave home without it, right? How could I? And how could all of you, right? The light is always within me, just as it is always within you. Sometimes in life, often in life, I think we find ourselves stumbling around in darkness. In countless situations, we imagine the worst, we imagine the dangers, we imagine the perceived enemies that might be out there. We let fear direct us when we could be guided by the unwavering light of Spirit. And we often stumble in the dark in our relationships as well. I want to share a quick example of a relationship where I stumbled in the dark. There have been many, so this is just one. But I'm going to tell a little story about my brother Steve. I have two brothers. My oldest brother Rob is often the target of my talks, because Rob and I are still stumbling around in the darkness a bit, kind of figuring out where each other is coming from. But I want to take this moment this morning to talk a little bit about my brother Steve. My brother Steve and I were really close when we were very young. But as we grew older, we kind of grew in different ways. I grew in this direction of being very organized and very intentional and very goal-oriented and always setting out to accomplish specific goals and projects that I had in mind. My brother Steve, on the other hand, he was an engineer. So he had, success, as the world would call it, but he only wanted to work long enough to save enough for time off. So he would work for 6 months and then take a year off, and then work another 6 months. It was all about the time off than the time on, so to speak. And for some reason, it contrasted with where I was coming with what I thought was important in life and how I thought life should be lived. And so I judged him. And I judged the way that he was living his life. And in doing so, I wasn't able to access the love that I felt for him. I wasn't able to appreciate who he was as a person and to remain close. We drifted apart. And it wasn't really until I was able to shine that internal light, that internal flashlight on our relationship, to see past those judgments, to kind of break through that fog. Until then, I felt like, well, I can see looking back that our relationship was shrouded in darkness. So I invite you to ask yourselves, where might you be stumbling in the dark? Where might you be fearful of what's out there, or fearful of the next step that you take? Where in your relationships could you bring light from within to discern that truest path? Maybe you can think of a relationship that's crying out for light, for the light of awareness and understanding. If so, have you looked inside yourself to find it? That's where it was. That's where it was for me. That's where I found it. It's there, but we have to open ourselves to bring it out. This talk this morning reminds me of a parable that Eckhart Tolle talks about that I want to share. It's called the parable of the beggar. And, well, it's referred to as the parable of the beggar. I think the parable is actually called "The Treasure You Seek Is Within You." And it goes like this. A beggar had been sitting by the side of the road for over 30 years. And one day a stranger walked by. "Spare some change," mumbled the beggar, kind of holding out his old baseball cap. And the stranger said, "I have nothing to give you." And then he asked, "What's that you're sitting on?" "Nothing," replied the beggar. "It's just an old box. I've been sitting on it for as long as I can remember." "Ever looked inside?" asked the stranger. "No," said the beggar. "What's the point? There's nothing in there." "Have a look inside," insisted the stranger. See, from your laughter, you're starting to figure out where this is going. So the beggar managed to pry the lid open, and then with astonishment and disbelief and elation, he saw the box was filled with gold. As Eckhart says, "I am that stranger who has nothing to give you, and who's telling you to look inside." Not inside a box, as in the parable, but somewhere even closer, inside yourselves. Eckhart goes on to say that those who have not found their true wealth, which is the radiant joy of being, and that deep, unshakable peace that comes with it, they're beggars, even if they have great material wealth. I think we're all beggars as long as we're seeking to find our wealth outside ourselves. We're looking for scraps of pleasure or fulfillment, for validation, for security, for love. When we have a treasure within that not only includes all those things, but is infinitely greater than anything the world can offer. That's the invitation today, to look inside. Find the treasure. Find that light so you can bring it into the world. Jesus tells us, and I say tells us in the present tense intentionally, because I don't know about all of you, but Jesus' wisdom and teachings are always accessible to us. It's not something in the past, it's something now. And he tells us, behold, the kingdom of God is within you. Behold, the kingdom of God is within you. Wow, the kingdom of God is within you. So, he's calling our attention to our true nature, right? What we call the Christ presence or Christ consciousness, or other words that we use to talk about that kingdom of God, that divinity, our true nature that's within us. We don't have to go anywhere or look anywhere else to find it. We simply have to look within. So what is this kingdom of God? Well, it's our divinity. It's our spiritual nature. It's our oneness. It's our fullest potential. It's that place inside us where love reigns. Just as it was with the beggar sitting on the box, it was and is and always will be accessible to us, but we need to direct our attention away from the things of the world to find it. We need to open an internal channel, as we were doing with our meditation. We need to open an internal channel to allow its expression in our lives. We have to turn the light on. So, what's our spiritual practice this week? Well, to open the box within us, to allow that, what's inside, to make itself known, to us. We don't have to try hard or do anything. We simply have to extend the invitation to Spirit to make itself known to us. That's all that we need to do. Extend that invitation, create that space, and allow. We have to just make space for that Christ consciousness within us to reveal itself. There's no real effort in that, just allowing. So we're going to make space for that Christ consciousness now, in this moment, so that it can shine on the path before us. We're not going to keep it inside any longer. And if you in the spiritual practice, if you feel resistance within yourself about this in some way, you can just ask yourself, why? Why is that? Are there thoughts or beliefs maybe that are holding you back, causing you to keep that chest closed? Maybe there's fear or doubt or self-judgment, shame, feelings of guilt. The list goes on and on. Why we kind of keep that chest closed? Because we might be afraid of what we're going to find. We need to trust. We need to trust what we know to be true. Inside that chest is our divinity. And I think in the spiritual practice, and I'll probably say this every week, spiritual practice is a deeply personal endeavor, right? My spiritual path is interpreted through my experience, just as your spiritual path is interpreted and embellished and enriched by your own individualized experience. My path looks very different than yours. That's why self-inquiry is so important. We have to check in with ourselves, not to judge anything that we find. We don't want to judge ourselves or judge other people. We're just looking and inquiring and inviting to understand. To understand. It's a big trap. That judgment is a big trap. It's a big one. Something that we're going to come back to again and again in our practice, because it's probably the biggest obstacle, I think, to our own spiritual development. We beat ourselves up over and over and over and over again. So we need to, again, just bring awareness to that. Not to judge it again and say, I shouldn't do that. And we're right back where we started, right? Just to be aware. Usually that awareness alone is enough to loosen the grip, Just allow it. Allow yourself to think whatever, feel whatever, make quote unquote mistakes. Just be with that and be aware of it. And it will bring you, it will lead you to learning and a better place. Spirituality, as you know, we're here every week. It's a lifelong practice. Mistakes aren't really mistakes. Something I'll probably say too. Mistakes really aren't mistakes. There are teachers. Wow, how powerful is that? There are teachers. That's how we learn, that's how we grow. So mistakes really are nothing compared to the lessons that we learn. So in the days ahead and weeks ahead, look inside and invite what's there to be part of your life. And I'll close with another quote by Jesus that's so fitting. Couldn't not say it. Can I say a double negative like that? I couldn't not say it. He really tells us, you are the light of the world. That's what he's talking about. You are the light of the world. Don't cover that up. Let's turn that on. Let's endeavor to allow that light to come through us. You are the light of the world. Thank you.